Right. Well, we will go ahead and get started here today. So thank you and welcome to Inequalities in Education, why we must create the urgency to change the trajectory. I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today. First off, thank you to the Truman Heartland Community Foundation for your support of today's program and the partnership of United We and Suburban Balance. For over 9 years, United We's CEO has led the organization to invest in research, advocacy, and policy solutions to remove economic barriers for women. To share more about United We's work, please welcome Wendy Doyle.
Thank you, Beth, for that really kind introduction. And wow, we are just delighted with the support and attendance for today's important topic. This event, as Beth said, is in partnership with Suburban Balance and is made possible thanks to some great funding from the Truman Heartland Community Foundation's Racial Equity Action Fund. Together, we're all working to address the lack of racial diversity in decision-making leadership positions in our community, including boards, commissions, and schools. Today's discussion on the need for more women of color in administrative roles, faculty search committees, and school boards is critical to our mission of gender equity. For too long, women of color have been overlooked, and we must change that today. In addition to conversations like these at United we're working to make change at the city, county, and state level with appointments of women of color to boards and commissions through United We's Appointments Project. This is a national program that is ending the outdated assumption that women are not interested or qualified for those positions. We've appointed 180 women to date, and that number is growing. The first 8 appointments of our Appointments Project were women of color, and now comprise 37% of all Appointments Project registrants based on self-reporting. We want to see the number of diverse women in civic spaces as well as in our education systems grow, and this starts today with awareness and conversations like these. United We is thrilled to partner with Suburban Balance and CEO founder LaShawn Walker, who has been working tirelessly for the last 10 years to provide educational and cultural opportunities to suburban kids of color. She works to ensure that children experience a well-balanced lifestyle while growing up in their suburban communities or attend schools that lack diversity. LaShawn founded the nonprofit in 2012, and to date, nearly 500 families from Missouri and Kansas have joined the organization. The advocacy work of Suburban Balance includes Lee Summit School District passed a district-wide equity plan, and in June of 2019, Suburban Balance's advocacy work led to a 6-to-1 revote on hiring a consultant to do diversity training, which was a huge part in changing the trajectory of this school district. Suburban Balance, in addition, has brought multiple superintendents to the table to discuss equitable policies and practices and to hold districts accountable for equity plan implementation. And Suburban Balance has also been a leader on voter education, shining the spotlight on the importance of school boards, hosting numerous candidate forums to bridge the community with candidates, and recently developed important framework that resulted in a successful new workshop to help educate on what it takes to run for school board. To date, 6 Suburban Balance parents now serve on school boards and in other elected positions in predominantly white suburban school districts, and 1 serves on the board of trustees at a local community college, and the majority make history as the first Blacks to do so. I'd like to also just share a little bit of background about LaShawn's personal accomplishments as I introduce today's panelists. So that's a bit about Suburban Balance and our great partnership that we have. In 2016, LaShawn was recognized for her work with Suburban Balance as an Examiner Women of Distinction honoree, a select group of women making a difference in Eastern Jackson County. Also in 2017, LaShawn was named an appointee by Jackson County Executive Frank White Jr. to serve on the Community Advisory Committee at the Health Forward Foundation. She then left her duties to really focus on her nonprofit in the year 2018. And LaShawn is the driving force behind the inspirational movement Lift Her Up, a local movement of more than 1,000 women she founded in 2017 to inspire more women to support, encourage, elevate, nominate, celebrate, and lift one another up in business and beyond. So LaShawn, welcome, and thanks for your leadership, and especially for founding Suburban Balance.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy.
Our next panelist I'd like to introduce is Dr. Lisa Wolf-Wendell, who is an Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the School of Education at the University of Kansas and a Professor of Higher Education in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. Dr. Wolf-Wendell earned her undergraduate degree in psychology and communications from Stanford University and her doctorate in higher education from the Claremont Graduate University. Dr. Wolf-Wendell is the author of numerous books and journal articles on topics related to equity issues in higher education. Her research includes faculty issues as it relates to the labor market, the needs of international faculty, and faculty from historically underrepresented groups, and policy response of academic institutions in wake of demands of dual career couple accommodations and work-family balance. Dr. Wolf-Wendell, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited about the conversation.
Thank you. And next, I'd like to introduce Meredith Rose, who has more than 20 years of career developing and cultivating resilient, trauma-informed, and inclusive communities. Meredith has served as an emergency management leader, a director of family and youth services programming, and an executive of human resources and supportive social services. Meredith has a master's level graduate degree from Park University, and she is a certified emergency manager. She is also the Chief People's Officer for Community Services League and Independence. Meredith oversees CSL's human capital management as well as the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. Meredith provides practical strategies and tools for understanding the impacts of trauma in trust building, how to foster meaningful connections across diverse people groups and communities, and key steps for constructing safe containing containers as the key to authentic coalition building. So Meredith is on the Truman Heartland Community Foundation Board of Directors and is the immediate past president of the Child Abuse Prevention Association's Board of Directors and was recently appointed to the Health Forward Foundation's Community Advisory Committee for 2022 through 2024. So welcome, Meredith.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to the dialogue today.
And the final panelist to introduce is Dr. Jennifer Bezalo, who coordinates the MSc Educational Administration and the Doctorate District Leadership Program at the University of Kansas and teaches courses in both levels of study. She earned her doctorate in educational leadership and policy studies from KU and has a background in K through 12 district and building leadership. Jennifer served 17 years in public schools roles in multiple roles in Kansas and North Carolina, including director of curriculum, federal programs and virtual learning, middle school and secondary director, principal, assistant principal, teacher, and coach. She is also a mentor for the Kansas Educational Leadership Institute, where she has coached principals in their first years of service and has taught undergraduate and graduate courses at Washburn, Fort Hays, and Baker Universities. She's also served on several Department of Education statewide committees. So welcome, Dr. Bezalo.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
What an outstanding panel. And so accomplished. So excited to be able to have this conversation with you today. And let's jump right in. So for our first question, this is going to be directed to Meredith, LaShawn, and Jennifer. So how does the lack of diversity and gender equity in school administration affect education and the student experience? Let's start with Meredith.
Thank you, Wendy. So I think it's important as a baseline, we really unpack diversity and gender equity in school administration and the setting at the most granular level first, so safety and belonging. So it's kind of this thought of considering Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a critical cornerstone and before Bloom's educational taxonomy. It's this notion that a student's need for safety and belonging is a core fundamental of so many of the theories that talk about creating resilient learners in safe, inclusive communities, specifically trauma-informed care. So if we drill down just briefly, research tells us that critical brain development is happening in the first years of our early learners. It's in caring homes with loving adults, and those brains are making connections of safety, belonging, and identity. And we know this is important because we see it mirrored in our early education classrooms. But at this age, at the critical point of brain development, everything I'm understanding about myself, my identity, it is based on my senses, what I hear from people who love me, the messages that are communicated in my native and cultural language, and the people who many times look like me and resemble me. So what's interesting, I would say, is that our early learners, as they advance, our school systems and our curriculums are designed to also advance, to evolve with our instructional strategies and our tools. So we adapt to connect with the development and cognitive needs and pace of our learners. Where I think our educational systems have struggled, however, is in the adaptation and prioritization of the social and cultural connections that are just as, if not more critically important as our learners grow. So I would say the absence of diversity, gender and racial equity, specifically presence, it sends a harmful message that is counter to the narratives of safety, belonging, and connection that we know are absolutely critical for our learners to continue thriving. I think the last thing I would say is specifically for those learners who may present with a number of what we call risk factors. So domestic violence, poverty, homelessness, crime-ridden neighborhoods, these elements of social and emotional connections are so heavily influential and necessary for their development. So without those, we set these learners up with a deficit. We're forcing them then to try and compensate and almost create their own replacement systems of safety. All the while, we're expecting them to remain engaged, present, and performing at the same pace and achievement of their counterparts. I think this lack of presence becomes then one of the first and most detrimental conditions of inequity that students face. And bottom line, the look, the cultural connection, and the breadth of human experience that a school leader has and presents ultimately sets the tone and the heartbeat for how students thrive within that building.
That's great. Really good perspective. Well, Sean, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I agree with just about everything Meredith mentioned. So if we go by, I look at a lot of different studies, and obviously lack of diversity and gender equity in school administration affects education and the students' experience tremendously. If we go by the studies and our students' lived experiences, then we know that lack of diversity and gender equity can significantly affect the academic outcomes for students, as well as their social emotional learning. One of the studies that I refer to a lot is the study that was done by Johns Hopkins University, which found that Black students who have at least one Black teacher by third grade are more likely to graduate from high school and significantly more likely to attend college. And so that in and of itself is profound with regards to our students and their academic futures. Another study that was interesting that I found looked at the impacts at the classroom level of diversity. And what it measured was the safety of students, how they felt about bullying, as well as loneliness. And those students who enjoyed the most diversity in the classroom, what they found was that they felt more safe, less bullied, and less lonely, so more included. And so, we focus a lot on diversity. I think that more needs to be focused on as far as gender equity as well. And as we know, gender equity is the fair treatment of girls and boys according to their respective needs. And we want both boys and girls to achieve their academic success. But we do know that girls often receive less attention in the classroom. Girls hear more comments about their appearances and their academic skills, and girls also receive less feedback. So I think it is incumbent upon school districts to implore and have equity training for all staff, so that our students can have a better future in terms of their academic outcomes, because that is what's at stake here in this conversation.
Sean, that's great. And I really appreciate you pointing out the importance of, just having representation, but gender equality too. It's an important point. Jennifer, what perspective would you like to add?
Well, thank you. LaShawn and Meredith are quite brilliant in their comments and what they just shared. I want to echo that sense of belonging and want to make sure that I share that value of having role models that look like you. Gender, race, personality, culture. I think those are really important. Leadership is a really lonely feeling at times. And so even the most confident leader going into a space sometimes will second guess themselves. So I believe, and I will share my personal story in being a Puerto Rican female who's 5'1", doing a lot of my building leadership at the middle and high school level. That's not typically a look that you find when you walk in and ask for the building principal. And I didn't have any kind of female leadership until I was about 26 to 28 years old to even see what a female superintendent looked like or a female principal looked like at those building spaces. So it's not just about being encouraged into those programs and encouraging, perhaps those underdogs into those fields. It's about also recognizing that they might have a support system so that they can thrive when they're in those spaces. So for me, it is detrimental when we are trying to encourage or recruit into those leadership spots, but we unfortunately don't have, even at the university level or at the building level, those role models to not only tap folks on the shoulder, but to show them that people from all different looks, personalities, cultures, and genders can lead as well.
Great perspective. Really good. Thank you.
Wendy, I know you didn't ask. I know you didn't ask.
No, but please, I was just going to open it up to, any additional thoughts based on what each other said. So please.
So I was just thinking when and part of my framing is higher ed. I think it works. So this thing I'm going to talk about works really well in a K-12 space. So when we talk about diversifying a school, I think it's important that we think about different dimensions of what we mean. So one is representation. So who are our teachers? Who are our principals? Who are our superintendents? Who are the students? So what are the demographic characteristics? And I think sometimes when we talk about diversifying, sometimes our conversation stops there. Like, let's just bring people in and count how many people of different kinds we have. And I mean, bringing people in and having people there is super important. I think it's a good first step. Second step, which I think gets at some of what Meredith and LaShawn and even Jennifer was talking about, is caring about climate. So when we bring people together, what is the space like? How do people feel like they belong? Do they feel like they fit in? Do they feel like they are connected? And who feels connected? I mean, you could have a space where one person feels really connected and someone else feels really alienated. So really being key and tuned into the climate of your educational space. 3, curriculum. What are we teaching? You can have all of the diverse places and people can feel really comfortable, but they're learning only dead white male curriculum or whatever, or they're not learning about their own history, or they're not learning. And so we have a lot of room to grow and to change and to think about what it is we're teaching and what it is we're valuing and how and I would include in curriculum pedagogy. And then the fourth area, so you have representation, climate, curriculum, and the fourth area is organizational transformation or organizational leadership. How are decisions made? Who's making those decisions? Who's at the table? Who isn't at the table? And that gets to your larger issue of boards, parents groups, community members, et cetera. And how are you can have, again, all the diversity and all the whatever, but a really top-down leadership style, in which case we're not listening to the folks who are our various constituents. So I think when we talk about diversifying, we need to not just talk about getting more numbers, we need to talk about those different elements. That's all I wanted to add.
So just a follow-up question on that, is there, for the participants today, is there in terms of those four priorities, is there one that you should start with in order to see that change happen? Is there something that you would recommend? And I would open that up to all of the panelists.
Well, I think you have to sort of, my take is you have to sort of take stock of your community and where you are. And I think some places will be farther along in the representation, but maybe not as far along in the curriculum and climate. I think in fact, one of the things is what happens is the more you bring in different representation, the more climate becomes a little more difficult, right? If everyone's all the same, everyone fits in, right? So it's when you bring in diversity that these, so I don't know, it's really interesting. These days, I'm almost thinking curriculum. And partly I'm thinking curriculum is because I think that what we teach people all the way up from pre-K all the way through higher education, people, if they only know one history, if they only know one side of the story, if only one kind of knowledge is privileged and we're not hearing other kinds of knowledge, then that's who becomes our teachers, and that's who becomes our leaders, and that's who becomes the decision maker. So we really have to, I don't know. I'm curious to hear what everyone else thinks.
Yeah. LaShawn, what do you think? Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I was just going to say that I think that, it depends on where the school is at. So, if you take a school like Lee Summit, for example, 4 or 5 years ago, that was not really a topic of conversation. And so I think that what you really have to do is get an ideal of where the school is demographically, and you also have to bring in parent and student voices. But I do think that it's important that we know that all of those elements matter: racial equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging. All of those matter. Curriculum. Students want to see themselves in curriculum. So we know that each and every one of those pieces are important elements in helping all students not only learn, but thrive. So diversity, equity, and inclusion matters to all students. So that's my perspective on that.
Meredith, do you have any thoughts that you would like to add?
Absolutely. I was going to offer, I really like this conversation about understanding the environment and the soil. And, to the other panelists' point, when you're evaluating what kind of supports, what kind of new teaching curriculum needs to be brought in, it's super important that you understand kind of what's in the air and what's in the roots. And there's this great graphic. If you look up resilient schools or communities, there is this image of a tree, and it talks about all of the outer lying external factors that make up really and influence the fruit that we see, which is oftentimes a child's or student's behavior or performance or their progression and where they choose to do life and where they end up spending most of their time if they leave their communities or if they decide to get their education and come back. But in the soil, there is this history of the isms. There's disenfranchisement, there's racism, there's gender inequality. And for certain communities, depending geographically, as LaShawn mentioned, where you're at, those factors in the soil could be so prevalent that they really create almost barriers and additional layers of complexity for students trying to operate and thrive within the school environment within that community. So a great administrator, a great board member will do their homework and spend time not only just considering what can I do new and differently this year in terms of curriculum, but there's this great thought process about don't plan about me without me. Getting in the dirt, understanding kind of the challenges, the needs, the opportunities, the history of the community in which your school feeds into and operates, and what do they celebrate that is good, working, and right about their culture, about their language, about what they bring to the table. Because a lot of times communities, particularly marginalized communities, will tell you exactly what they need to thrive because they've been doing it well on their own and with systems of support that they have built. So I think it's really important. I would just echo that assessment. While it is time intensive, it requires a lot of hard work. And we've got timelines and we've got standards we have to meet and we've got competencies that we have to prove. communities and school communities that don't make that time to authentically and organically connect well with their communities will end up feeling that disconnect later when they're really trying to help students shift and move needles and progress. So spending that time to be a true school community partner is so critical.
Excellent.
I would just quickly add, thank you, Meredith. I would just quickly add that the importance of diversity on a school board. They're the ones who are making all of the decisions and driving the policy in a school district. So it is important. And, that's why we as an organization, we are intentional around looking for equity-friendly candidates who will step up and run for school board. It is crucial that we have a diversity on school boards.
Sean, you make such a great point. It really, as you said, starts at the top. And we need, that's part of what United We does, is just really trying to build that pipeline and encouraging women. We know that women want to be asked. So I think a key takeaway for the audience today is, if you know someone you think would be great with that representation at the school board level, encourage them, ask them to run for that school board position. Jennifer, any final thoughts from you on the points that have been made here?
I agree. I think it's an exciting topic. I do see a lot of school districts that are really starting to push forward and try to diversify boards and diversify their building leaderships. But I would just also encourage that when those decision makers and encouragers are doing so, that they think about not just a top-down model, but also a bottom-up model of support, so that we're really truly supporting those leaders that are in those roles. And so I've seen time and time again, unfortunately, some school districts thinking that hiring a diverse administrator is going to fix things, right? Because back to Dr. Wolf-Wendell's check in the box, that phase one, it is a start. But if we don't have a supporting community underneath in terms of stakeholders, teachers, I've seen those leaders really struggle and tend to say, you're not ready for me and what I can bring forward. And then they move forward. So instead of perpetuating that cycle, I'd like to see us disrupt it by having the support model from the top and the bottom.
Jennifer, there's a term sometimes in the literature, it's called the glass cliff, where we bring people in, oftentimes women and people of color, women of color, we bring them into situations that are precarious, leadership positions that are precarious, and then we watch them fall off the cliff, metaphorically speaking, and we sort of set people up and don't provide them with the kind of support, and we are more likely to have to establish glass cliffs for folks who are in minoritized positions, and then you say, well, see, that failed, that didn't work.
Yep.
So we set up that person, but we also set up the future of the organization. So that glass cliff metaphor, I think, is a really good one to think about.
Absolutely. I had a former superintendent who meant well, but he told me at a tipping point of exhaustion when I was doing a lot of change work in my building, he said, Jennifer, we just love to sit back and watch you lead. And man, that was a powerful passive statement that has stuck with me to this day. So to your point, I agree wholeheartedly.
Meredith, you were going to say something. Yeah.
Having for the last 6 or 7 years been in that very position, while it's such an honor to be able to be the change agent and the activist and the voice that represents those who are not at the table and in the room, that foundational work has to be in place within the district and within the board. And you need to build, whether it's at the micro levels, several safe containers in which we can have those conversations and kind of that responsive generative dialogue safely. So you can ask me very courageous questions and I can be very transparent about where we're off, where we're going, where we need to be. But without that system of support, I would agree that sustainability is very hard. And for the sojourners in the room who want to stay in the work and want to really kind of cultivate leaders who look like us underneath, we tire out early because there is not that foundational support. Where do I tap out and sit on the bench for a while? Who can I tag in? And so allies and advocacy is so important, especially for those who don't look like me for that very reason.
Really great point. Well, let's move on to another question here. And I'm going to start this question with Lisa, but again, open this up to the entire panel to respond to. What are the organizational structures and education systems that affect women and women of color pursuing an administrative career in education? And then how can we encourage and support more women to pursue these career opportunities?
That's a big question. So let me I'll take part, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will jump in. Well, so as you all, the audience probably knows, right? So teaching is a very feminized profession. It depends on what state or what, but nationally, about 78% of all teachers are identify as women. Majority of those identify as white women. There's historically been a pipeline for women of color to join the teaching profession. But what happens is, I don't always like pipeline metaphors, but as you go up the pipeline, you see fewer and fewer women and people of color in leadership positions. And I did some looking around. So so I said 78% of teachers identify as women. In some cases, I've seen up to 80%. But again, then when you go to the principal level, that number drops to about like 52%. But women are also underrepresented in middle and high schools. So the majority of women who become principals in elementary school settings. And then again, as you go up from principal to superintendent, you see there's fewer than 15% of women superintendents. When women are in that pipeline, they go, so one of the steps you can go is you go from teacher to being an assistant principal, for example. Women and women of color in particular stay in that assistant principal position for longer. They're less likely to get tapped, because that is sort of, that Jennifer used that terminology. So in order to get to be in the States, in order to become a building leader, principal, or a super, and then a district leader, you need a certification, you need a master's degree, and then you need a doctorate, or you need the certification to be a superintendent. So you see fewer women getting those degrees, but even when you see when there's more some equality, women are not getting tapped to be that next into that leadership position, and women of color in particular, there's a much longer lag there. The why, it's a very interesting question. I think a lot of times people try to talk about it as like, oh, personal choice. Women have babies, or women are doing other things, or women are in dual career couples, or women are, and they're choosing not to do that. I have a real problem with that. I mean, believe me, these days I'm a big fan of choice. I'm a big advocate of choice. At the same time, though, if you make this all about what individual women choose, then you lose the structural problem. So I use the pipeline metaphor. I'm going to use that. If you blame the drop of water for falling out of your broken pipe, it's not going to fix the pipe. If I have a broken pipe, I'm a homeowner. If I have a broken pipe, I'm calling the plumber, and I'm having the pipe fixed, and I'm fixing the structural things in the pipe. So the tap itself is a structural thing. The creation, the formation, who's on the boards, who are the superintendents, how the tap happens or doesn't happen, what we expect of someone who's a principal, that we make it not jive with someone who also has primary care responsibilities, that we make it, I mean, those are structural things that can be changed. I'm gonna stop there and let my colleagues add on. There's more to add, but I'm gonna let them.
LaShawn, do you have any thoughts to add?
I don't. I think Lisa did a good job. Yeah.
Great. Jennifer?
I agree. I think it's more than just putting those college applications out there and saying we have a program and we want you to be a part of it. I think superintendents folks in those decision-making spaces grow your own programs. There's a lot that we could do out in the field to really enhance and diversify our leadership candidates. I think just to say there's a program up the street is not enough any longer. So I would agree.
Yes. And Meredith, any thoughts from your perspective?
Absolutely. I think, I'm a big fan of research and best practices, and I think it's really easy for districts and district leaders to expand their lens to see what's happening around the country. Where are other states making inroads and strong, authentic connections with minority groups and groups that support gender equality? Boston Public Schools, for example, they use this kind of two-pronged approach, specifically focusing on recruiting people of color for their teaching fellowship program, as well as for cultivating kind of this progressive path towards superintendency. There are a number of examples of kind of these collaboratives of states that either through kind of enacting or removing state policies in order to increase the number of non-white teachers that are teaching by a certain time period. There's a lot of, I think, good work that's happening around the country, but I still go back to, again, a true school, a community-based school that invites the community champions and just the change agents that are going to support the schools and allow them and foster them in thriving after that leadership gets in place. They often are well connected to the educational leaders and the people of impact and influence right in their backyard. So I think if school boards and school leaders would do a great job of creating containers, whether it be advisory groups or kind of these supplemental advisory supports to their hiring practices, again, going beyond the traditional of just, contacting the historically Black college or setting up at a college recruiting fair, but actually creating an ongoing organic relationship with an advisory group where those people are more likely to come up and through the success that they will not only get the great reputability that they're in a district and a leadership team really trying to transform the look, the feel, and the face and the lens of their leadership. But that group will start to think, oh, XYZ school district is really trying to make a notable change, and I consider myself a partner in this effort. And so I just think there's a collaborative approach that would be much more successful and sustainable in really trying to recruit, attract, and retain those leaders of color and of gender equality.
All well said. And I think, one of the things that United We has paid attention to and we care about is the composition of the search committees, especially for the superintendent, and making sure that, it's primarily school board members that are serving on that search committee. So if we really want to lean into some change, really having good representation on school boards to be a part of that superintendent search, and then just, faculty and administration search committees and panels need to be more reflective of the community. So a key point for United We that we're concerned about. Let's move on to a next question. So what is the biggest challenge for women and women of color educators and principals today? And Meredith, let's start with you on that question.
So good question. I think with this, the tendency might be, and really is easy to point to the risk factors. So the environment, the traumas, the threats in the soil, and the constructs that may have been historically and are still actively designed to isolate women from positions in educational leadership where they're needed most. So essentially I could talk about the harm and the harm doers, but the truth is, I have long learned from my mother, who is my hero and a survivor of the civil rights era, that these factors unfortunately exist everywhere. And not to say we shouldn't really maintain our fervor and diligently work to challenge those threats through advocacy and dismantling. I have personally found today, at least for me, my healing, my strength, and my joy is found in what I can control and knowing where I can excel. So for me, the answer to your question is really introspection. I believe collectively for women, our greatest challenge and opportunity is establishing a presence that matters and creating a clear strategic path of how to maximize our presence and ultimately our influence. So how do I do this? To do this, I ask a lot of questions. How have the deficits, the losses, the acts of discrimination and isolation I've experienced given me eyes to a deeper understanding of the harm from the lens of someone else? How have the tables, the boards, for me, the Homeland Security Command Centers that I've sat in and on where my brown face was the only one, given me perspective around the power and influence that my voice carries and so many more like mine. And then lastly, kind of how has the healing I've experienced since so many of those painful moments of rejection in my professional career really softened my heart in such a way that I can make room to advocate a little louder and a little longer for those who don't yet agree with me, but do so in a way that is filled with truth wrapped in grace. And then what I do is after I kind of do this introspection, I take all of this and I map it out, and I use that to really map out the trajectory of my own professional career. My career, the seats I wanted to occupy, the rooms I wanted to be in, or the regulatory spaces even in which I wanted my learning, my lens, and my leadership to have influence and power. And I strategically created allies and partnership and collaboration with those seats that I thought I could represent. But the key for me was I can spend my time and energy focusing on the harm doers, and the systems will be the systems. And I think conversations like this are critically important. Breaking down those systems and dismantling those systems is important. But I think the greatest opportunity for women is looking at my own personal introspective development kind of and trajectory plan for my profession. Where can I be? Where can I go? And what piece or range of influence can I have based on all that I've learned and all the doors that were closed? And that's personally what has worked well for me. When I still reserve the right to be that strong, courageous voice to say, this is harmful. We need to discontinue doing this. But I'm now spending my time and energy blooming where I can be planted, where doors have been opened, and then bringing other women, other minorities of color along with me in the journey.
Thank you. Very well said. Lisa.
Meredith's approach is so powerful, and I just think it's so important. If we wait for people to open the door for us and we sit around and sort of wait for that, we'll be waiting for a really long time. And Meredith talked about her mother, and I'll mention mine as well. You know, my mom was a Betty Friedan and was a second wave feminist, and when my brother and sister and I were quite young, we were 3, 5, and 7. We lived in Alaska, and my mom decided she needed to have a little more education and needed to pursue a career. And so she, with the support of my father, I don't know what would happen if he didn't support her, but with the blessing of all of us, left for 2 years and went to California and got a master's degree in museum education, came back to us as a family and got a job at the Anchorage Museum, and was she's since passed away, but was the director of the museum in Anchorage for 35 years. And I think as a young woman watching her, I mean, all of those choices, leaving your kids, moving away from home, going back to school, struggling, all of the sort of nasty looks and even from her within her own family, you know, my grandmother and all of this, and you know, she just did it, and she didn't wait for it to be okay. And I think that that's similar to Meredith's story. That's sort of what you don't wait for the invitation. But the other thing she did, and I think that I hope that, and Meredith mentioned this too, is when you get into that position of power and you get into that space, then you try to open the door wider and you try to take people along and grab them up, and not just who look like you, but who you try to sort of figure out, like, who closed the door on me and how do I work with them and hold the door open with my right foot as I'm doing all of the other things. And I think that's really important. I think the helping people up though, and trying to figure out the structure that is holding us back. I mean, Meredith, you used the metaphor of the garden and the soil, and you know, if we have a structure that's creating bad soil, yeah, we can bloom over here, but we can't bloom over here. So what do we need to cultivate better soil? And when we're in positions of power, when we're in positions to help others, what do we need to do to make it better? And there's a lot that's broken right now. There's a lot that's broken. So there's a lot of gardening to do. I guess I would say. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Jennifer.
Yeah, for me, this one is a lot about expectations. I think there's, an understandable level of hypocrisy in female leadership, and it's confusing and it's hard. And I would say that, some of the major characteristics that are confusing is this need to be warm and approachable. And some of these are general good leadership qualities, but more so than maybe perhaps our male counterparts. I've seen, females, specifically that I've mentored that are women of color that say, people are telling me I'm coming across a certain kind of way, or I'm too intense, I'm too this, I'm too that. And we've really had to unpack that. And if that's the actual leader's issue or if that's somebody else's issue. But I think going into the field, it's tough. You can be too tough to anything. And so trying to meet those expectations, not only of your faculty and your stakeholders in your building, right? It's also the community and the parents that are coming into the front doors with certain expectations. And those are tough. And it's not so much, I don't think the answer is just get thick skin. I think that's a cop-out answer, really. I think we need to really unpack that systems piece. If it's gardening, what do we need to do to fix that? Because I think it runs a lot of good leaders out of the business, because that in of itself is exhausting. And I think that from a district-wide perspective, there might be some unfair or at least allowable differences in expectations and behaviors, maybe put on some of our female leaders. And I think to unpack that and to really pull back and maybe have some more standardized expectations of how our leaders lead and permission for our women to lead how they need to lead showing up is really important. And I think if we can tackle that, we can tackle a big part of what is wearing on some of our leaders in addition to their jobs.
Well, Sean, thank you for that. Oh,
Jennifer, don't you think sometimes, it's what other people expect, but it's also the little voices in our own head about our own expectations about what it means to be, I did all those interviews with tenure track women faculty members who are parents raising children while also being on the tenure track. And, they'll often describe, they have two heads sitting on their whispering in their ear all the time. One is their dissertation advisor or some sort of academic person who's saying, you're not doing enough, you need to do this. And the other one is their mother or their mother-in-law whispering in their ear, you need to be a better parent, you need to, and so we tell ourselves, we internalize those messages and we tell ourselves. So a lot of times I think women, feel guilty about the work-family balance, about where they're spending their time, and in contrast, I don't think the gender norms and expectations for parenting, for example, are the same for men as they are for women. And so just saying, I'm going to, dad saying, I'm going to leave the meeting early to go pick up my kid from daycare is a heroic act that we laud, in which they feel really proud of themselves. And the same act induces guilt for a lot of women. And again, it's these societal norms and structures. So it is what other people say, but it's also been so internalized. It's hard to break them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see women working so hard, almost an overachievement kind of refusal to turn off to please and to meet all those expectations, and that wears them down. So absolutely. And I can say that from personal experience, always trying to be the best mom and the best coworker. And I think that kind of fatigue, even inside the office space, is its own challenge. So absolutely. Yeah.
And I would just say, to add on to that, I am just so intentional about making sure that we create space and we create opportunities for women to come together, to encourage one another and support each other, to, say to other women to own your own power. Our voices are needed in all spaces. We bring a unique set of experiences to any boardroom, any table, and we just need to be more intentional about encouraging and supporting each other. I think studies show that one of the reasons why women don't run for school board is because, you know, of course, societal and historical factors, but also too that they need encouragement. And I think that is one of the biggest pieces to us just owning our own power, is having other women to share in that space with us and lift us up in the boardroom or in our workspaces, etc. So, in my organization, that's one thing that we have been intentional about, and that is creating workshops like this Prepare to Run school board workshop, because a lot of women may not know what it takes to run for school board. So we're intentional about creating opportunities to bring women together to support and encourage one another.
That's great, LaShawn. And I'm going to start with another question back with you. How can non-educators, those who are joining us today, cultivate change in K through 12 education?
Well, I would say that non-educators cultivating change in K through 12, I would say that just absolutely get involved. So if you are a parent, if you are a student, and you want to cultivate change in your school district, I would say go to your next school board meeting, find out what is actually happening in your school district, find out what is happening in the administrative level of the district, find out about the equity policies and practices. Do they exist? And if they don't, that's when we need to speak up and attend those school board meetings, write letters, be advocates, be our own advocates to help cultivate change in K through 12.
Thank you. Really good. Jennifer.
You know, I know I have quite the practitioner's perspective, but I can say it means a lot to have members of the community, parents, folks who sometimes you almost get you're almost on the defense because you just go through the day putting out a lot of fires in those roles. So it's amazingly powerful to just get an email or a call or a reach out from some community members who maybe are happy, or just to say some encouraging piece of news, because that is fuel for leaders. And sometimes we think no communication sometimes also leads to dissatisfaction, or perhaps my school community is not happy. So I just think that every voice is really powerful, and sometimes we respond to the squeaky wheels just because of the fast-paced nature of education. So I think just making your voice heard and encouraging perhaps those non-traditional leaders is really powerful.
Thank you. Good. Lisa.
Yeah, I'm all for encouraging people to run for school board, and it's a pretty big time commitment, and I'm actually remembering that when my mom went away, my dad was president of the school board, and we used to go, my brother and sister and I, anyway, used to go sit under the table during the school board meetings and was to play at his feet while he was leading the school board meetings. But I think it's a huge responsibility, and I'm a big fan of people doing that. I think there's other ways to get involved in schools as well. At a minimum, if you can, going to parent-teacher conferences and having conversations and meeting the school leaders, getting to know them. I think if you can, being involved in the PTA or the SRO or whatever it's called, or the community organization in your school, I think is really important. I think a lot of schools have recognized that they need to be mindful about how and when those meetings take place, so that parents maybe who work non-traditional hours can attend. And I think many schools have gotten better about that. If they're not better, that's something to start with. I want to participate in school, but you hold your meetings when I'm at work or when I don't have daycare or don't have childcare. Is it possible for you to make an accommodation? Can the kids play in the gym while we have this meeting, or can we do whatever that is? I think that's a place to ask. I don't think we should just assume that the reason that parents aren't involved is because they don't want to be. It's often because they don't have the time or resources to do so. So I do think that's a note to the schools. But if it is the case that you'd like to be involved, there are ways to be involved that are less time intensive than a school board member. And maybe that good place to start is to sort of know what the issues are and know what I think there's been some, well, school boards are political. There've been it's been really tough, I think, for a lot of folks, apropos of school boards, because people are running on sort of one issue. I want to keep X out of the schools, or keep Y out of the schools, or do blah, blah, whatever, and you sort of get people interested in their one issue and running, rather than sort of thinking more holistically about the school. So I would say get involved in ways that make sense given your time and ability. And even if you can't be on the school board, there's lots of ways to do that.
Thank you for that. Meredith.
Yeah, it's all been said, and I thought, maybe what I could leave is just some lasting kind of thoughts that will resonate with our participants and our listeners today. Before you can talk about reconciliation, racial reconciliation, equality reconciliation, gender reconciliation, you've got to start with relational reconciliation. And a lot of times, especially now, the environment around school boards, school districts, leaders, they're tired, teachers are tired. And it was mentioned, just a show of support presence is so important. I think if we want to impact the fruit, we've got to start at the root. There are some big systems issues where we absolutely need diversity on boards. We need better tables that are longer and more inclusive. But at the most granular level, where we started, is that our children need to see more people that look like us. And so if that's PTA, if that's adopting the building for a Friday and showing up to give high fives to every child that offloads off the bus, on Fridays, high five Fridays, there's something that happens that is powerful, that's synergistic, when parents, community members, members of faith, nonprofit leaders give of their time, their heart, and their energy just to be a presence around the school. It creates a safety and a connection that says, I want to partner with you in this. And then once that kind of transformative relational connection starts happening at the building level, you'll find that you've got built-in allies and supporters and champions, both on the staff side and the community side, that will kind of lift you in that progressive path of what that looks like for you. So I know we need to reach for the board seats, which are all important. And there are some people who are naturally going to come out ready and well-equipped, well-experienced to take that seat. But if you're listening and you're thinking about that parent who just wants to get involved, I go back to bloom where you're planted, whether it's showing up to volunteer, it's supporting the leadership, it's reading a book, your presence matters. And then be curious and open to what that could evolve to and look like as you stay authentically connected in the building. Those opportunities will come, but do your work, do your research, but do your time in the dirt first. Try to really understand the climate, the culture, the air of the building, of the leader, what the needs are. So that way, the time that comes when that opportunity is presented for you to take that seat or run for that seat or whatever that looks like, you will have had all of that information and that data collection to know really how to best utilize and harness your voice, your heart, your service, and your lens to really transform the seat that you've been designed to occupy. So start in the dirt. That seems to work well. So that's what I've got.
Thank you so much, Meredith. And thank you to our panelists. Believe it or not, we are at time. And I want to thank you for this enlightening and important conversation. But before we close, I want to turn to LaShawn and really want to extend our United We thanks for your tremendous partnership. And just for any final words, just, about your work. You've got, an important survey that you're getting ready to complete. So LaShawn, take it away.
Well, thank you, Wendy, and thank you to this distinguished panel of women. It's been an honor to serve with all of you today. This has been a substantive discussion, and I'm excited about the work that's ahead. We must continue to have the conversation, but also continue to do the work around educational equity, gender equity. And that is why my organization has launched, I think, a robust research project around quality education. And so we are currently working on a documentary to share the lived experiences of both parents and students. We looked at asking students and parents to tell us how they define quality education. These are families of color who are raising kids in suburban school districts. And so we are looking forward to sharing our data. It was robust. We had 523 respondents out of 1,000 surveys. And so we're excited to share our documentary coming this fall. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, LaShawn. Thank you again. And Beth, any final comments?
Yes, just thanks again for all the panelists who participated today. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experiences with the group. You know, for communities to best serve women and their families, we need strong and diverse representation of women at the decision-making table that truly reflects our residents. If you want to be part of this systematic change, as said before, consider to serve on a city, county, or state board or commission. You can learn more about opportunities at www.united-we.org in our appointments project, which helps women navigate the process of applying for boards and commissions. We also hope you stay engaged with our organizations. United We has an upcoming event, We Work for Change, featuring Naja West, and Suburban Balances, Inequities in Education Summit, where you can learn more about mobilizing, organizing, and advocating for students and the research that LaShawn has mentioned here today. Thank you for attending, and we also can provide a link to this recording for you to share with your friends.
Thank you so much, everyone, panelist from Bangladesh.